The Arizona sun hung mercilessly over Fort Bragg's advanced sniper training facility. Heat waves rippled across the concrete firing platform where 13 men stood in a row. Elite shooters, the best America had to offer. Delta Force operators, Navy SEALs, Marine Scout snipers, men who had proven themselves in combat zones across the globe. Men who had made impossible shots under impossible conditions. Today, they faced a challenge that made even their impressive records seem insignificant, a 4,000-meter shot. Nearly 2.5 miles. A distance where the bullet would drop over 800 feet. Where wind, temperature, and even the Earth's rotation became critical factors. Where success separated legends from merely exceptional shooters. Colonel William Reynolds watched from beneath the shadow of a canvas awning, his weathered face impassive beneath his Vietnam-era boonie hat. At 70, Reynolds had long since retired from active duty, but his reputation as one of the architects of modern American sniper doctrine had earned him an invitation to this demonstration. His presence commanded respect, a living link to the Cold War era when American snipers had matched wits with their Soviet counterparts in a shadow war few civilians would ever know about. "Gentlemen," Major Scott Mitchell addressed the assembled shooters. His voice carried the crisp authority of a career officer. Today's test evaluates the XM-2080 targeting system, 4,000 meters, one shot. The future of American special operations depends on our ability to eliminate high-value targets at unprecedented distances. Mitchell gestured to a group of men in dark suits standing at the edge of the shade. Our friends from Langley are particularly interested in the results. The CIA has invested significant resources in this technology. The men nodded almost imperceptibly. Government men, the type who never sweated despite the heat, the type whose names changed depending on which embassy they visited. At the far end of the firing line stood Captain Frank Carter, 6'2" of hardened muscle and absolute confidence. 26 confirmed kills in Afghanistan. Multiple marksmanship medals. The rising star of Naval Special Warfare Command. His custom Barrett M82A1 50 caliber rifle gleamed in the sunlight, modified with the experimental XM-2080 targeting system that promised to revolutionize long-distance shooting. "This is a formality," Carter muttered to his spotter. "The brass already promised me command of the new program after this demonstration. Just watch." The first shooter took position, measured the wind with handheld devices, calculated humidity, barometric pressure, temperature, adjusted his scope with micro-precision, breathed, settled, fired. The crack of the shot echoed across the range. 4 seconds passed in tense silence. "Miss, left, 2 meters," called the range officer. The second shooter, the third, fourth, fifth, each one representing thousands of hours of training, each one missing the target at 4,000 meters. By the 11th shooter, murmurs rippled through the observers. The conditions must be impossible. Perhaps the target was malfunctioning. Perhaps this whole demonstration was designed to fail, to justify more research funding. Colonel Reynolds watched without comment, his arms crossed over his chest. His eyes, however, tracked movement at the edges of the gathering. A woman walked purposefully across the concrete toward the ammunition depot. Lieutenant Olivia Morgan, 32 years old, average height. Brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Nothing about her stood out among the sea of uniforms. Logistics officer, supply chain management, the invisible backbone of military operations. "Coffee girl," one of the younger SEALs called out. "Bring some donuts next time." Laughter rippled through the group. Morgan didn't acknowledge them, didn't react. But Reynolds noticed how her eyes tracked everything. Wind flags, heat mirage, the subtle shift in cloud patterns overhead. Not the casual glance of someone observing, but the calculated assessment of someone measuring. Inside the ammunition depot, a young private dropped a crate. Bullets scattered across the concrete floor. Mixed calibers, different weights, chaos. "Shit," the kid muttered, kneeling down. Morgan crouched beside him. Without speaking, she sorted the rounds by caliber, weight, and manufacturer in under 30 seconds. Each one placed precisely where it belonged, her fingers moving with practiced certainty. How did you? The private stared. Physics, Morgan said simply. She stood, dusted off her hands, walked away. Reynolds, watching from the doorway, narrowed his eyes. That wasn't random. That was training. Deep training. The 12th shooter missed. Then the 13th. A Marine with a reputation for cold-bore precision. Only Captain Carter remained. He stepped up to the firing line with the confidence of a man who had never truly failed at anything. He settled behind his rifle, engaged the XM-2080 targeting system. Lights glowed on the digital display. Algorithms calculated wind, temperature, bullet drop. Science replacing skill. He fired. The shot cracked across the desert. Miss? Right, 1.5 meters. Carter's face flushed red beneath his tan. The system must be miscalibrated. These conditions are impossible. Major Mitchell's disappointment was palpable. The CIA observers exchanged glances. Millions in development, and not a single hit to show for it. Well, gentlemen, Mitchell began, I think we've gathered sufficient data to— May I try, sir? The voice, female, calm, steady, cut through the heat-soaked air. Every head turned. Lieutenant Morgan stood at the edge of the firing line. Not in tactical gear, just her standard utility uniform. No spotter, no specialized equipment. Carter laughed out loud. You serious right now? She doesn't even have a combat qualification, someone muttered. Maybe she'll hit the sky, another joked. Laughter spread through the group. Morgan kept her eyes on Mitchell. May I try, sir? Mitchell looked at her, then at the CIA observers. One of them, older than the others, with the bearing of someone who had seen combat before wearing a suit, gave an almost imperceptible nod. One shot, Lieutenant, Mitchell said. Make it count. Morgan approached the firing line. The rifle waiting there, a Barrett M82A1, was not her weapon of choice, designed for material destruction rather than precision. But it would do. She picked it up, felt its weight, checked the action. Around her, soldiers whispered and smirked. This should be entertaining. A logistics officer trying to outshoot elite snipers. But Morgan didn't hear them. She pulled a small leather notebook from her cargo pocket, opened it to a page filled with handwritten calculations. Wind drift formulas. Atmospheric pressure tables. Coriolis effect adjustments. She glanced at the wind flags, then at the heat shimmer dancing above the range. Her eyes tracked invisible patterns in the air. She retrieved a single bullet from her pocket, examined it, loaded it with practiced precision. Carter crossed his arms. Don't waste our time. Lieutenant. Morgan settled behind the rifle, adjusted the stock, checked the scope, disconnected the XM-2080 system, choosing human skill over technology. The sun beat down. Sweat formed on brows around her, but Morgan's breathing was steady, slow. Her heart rate dropped to 59 beats per minute. The wind shifted slightly, 11.3 miles per hour from the northwest, gusting to 14. Without using instruments, she adjusted her scope. 3 MOA right. 800 feet elevation. Her mind calculated factors that the observers couldn't even name. Her world narrowed to a single point 4,000 meters away. Everything else dissolved. The crowd, the whispers, the doubt. Only the target existed. Her breathing slowed further. In, hold, out, hold. She'd learned this rhythm in mountains where the air was thin and every breath mattered. Where one shot meant the difference between mission success and body bags. Through her scope, heat waves danced like ghosts. The target wavered, distorted by temperature gradients and atmospheric interference. It wasn't where it appeared to be. Physics lied at this distance. But Morgan knew how to read the lies. Wind speed, 11.3 mph, gusting to 14. Direction, northwest, shifting. Temperature, 97 degrees. Air pressure, 12 inches of mercury. Humidity, 16%. She didn't need instruments. Her body read the environment the way others read books. Bullet drop at 4,000 meters, approximately 819 feet. Flight time, 3.8 seconds at this velocity. Coriolis effect. The Earth's rotation would push the bullet right at this latitude. Spin drift. The bullet's rifling would cause rightward drift. All of this happened in her mind in less than 10 seconds. Her finger rested on the trigger. Not pulling yet, just feeling. The rifle became an extension of her body, her intent, her will. She exhaled halfway, held. Her heart beat once, twice. On the third beat, between breaths, in the space where body and weapon aligned perfectly, she fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a familiar violence almost comforting. The bullet left the barrel at 2,950 feet per second, spinning at 200,000 rotations per minute. A tiny missile carrying her intent across 2.5 miles of air. The crowd watched, frozen. The bullet climbed, then began its long arc downward. Wind caught it, pushed it right, but Morgan's adjustments held. Gravity pulled, but her calculations predicted this. Time stretched. 3.8 seconds felt like an eternity. Then, ting. The sound was distant but unmistakable. Metal on metal. Through the spotting scope, the observer whispered, "Impact!" Then louder, "Impact! Dead center!" The crowd erupted in shock and disbelief. Morgan didn't react. She engaged the safety, set the rifle down carefully, removed her hearing protection. Her hands were steady, her expression calm. Major Mitchell stared at the screen displaying the target. The bullet hole was perfectly centered. Perhaps the cleanest shot he'd ever witnessed at this range. "How?" he said quietly, though his voice carried. "That correction," Morgan met his eyes. "Physics, sir. Wind northwest to southeast, 11.3 mph average with gusts to 14. Temperature at 97 degrees creates mirage effect at 600 meters. Compensated right 3 MOA, elevation 819 feet. Lieutenant Morgan turned to walk away. As she passed Colonel Reynolds, their eyes met briefly. In that moment, something passed between them. Recognition. Reynolds's weathered face betrayed nothing, but his mind raced back 30 years to another impossible shot. To Berlin, to the Cold War, to a sniper known only as the Ghost. A man whose calculations had been identical to Morgan's. A man who had made shots that defied explanation. A man who had trained his daughter from childhood in the art of precision. A man who had disappeared after a mission gone wrong in 1998, presumed dead. As Morgan walked away, Reynolds noticed Captain Carter's expression. Not admiration, not respect, but something darker. The look of a man who recognized a threat to his ambition. The demonstration was over, but something much more significant had begun. That was luck. Pure luck. Captain Frank Carter's voice carried across the officers' club that evening. He sat surrounded by fellow SEALs, a glass of bourbon in his hand. No logistics officer makes that shot without a targeting system. It's statistically impossible. Outside the window, darkness had fallen over Fort Bragg. The day's heat lingered in the concrete and steel, but a cooler breeze had begun to blow. In a corner booth, Colonel Reynolds sat alone, nursing a glass of water. His eyes tracked Lieutenant Morgan as she entered, collected a sandwich from the counter, and found a solitary table. Reynolds stood, his movements deliberate, but still carrying the fluid grace of a man who had once moved through forests undetected. He approached Morgan's table. "May I join you, Lieutenant?" Morgan looked up, assessed him, nodded once. Reynolds sat, placed his water glass carefully on the table. "That was quite a shot today." "Thank you, sir. I've only seen one other person make calculations like that." Reynolds paused, watching her reaction. Berlin, 1989. A CIA operator known as the Ghost. 2,700-meter shot across the wall. Took out a Soviet general who was planning to assassinate 3 American assets. Morgan's expression remained neutral, but her hand paused almost imperceptibly in the act of lifting her sandwich. "That man was the best sniper I ever knew," Reynolds continued. "He disappeared in '98. Operation Blackbird. Enemy territory. No body recovered." He leaned forward slightly. "But before that, he had a daughter. Taught her everything he knew from the time she could hold a rifle." Morgan set her sandwich down. With respect, Colonel, I'm a logistics officer, and I'm just a retired old man. Reynolds smiled thinly. But we both know that's not the whole story, Spectre 1. The code name hung in the air between them. Morgan's eyes flicked to the exits. Habitual threat assessment. No one's used that call sign in years, she said quietly. The CIA never forgets its assets, Lieutenant. Reynolds took a sip of water. Especially not those trained by Gregory Morgan. Olivia Morgan's composure cracked, just slightly. The mention of her father's name opened old wounds. My father died serving his country. Is that what they told you? Reynolds placed a small thumb drive on the table between them. Or is that what you needed to believe after Echo Valley? The name hit her like a physical blow. Echo Valley, Afghanistan, 2016. 4 dead teammates. 12 enemy combatants eliminated, and her father, missing again after reappearing to lead that mission. How do you know about Echo Valley? Her voice had dropped to a whisper. Because I've been investigating it for 3 years. Reynolds nudged the thumb drive toward her. And I believe your father is still alive. In her quarters that night, Lieutenant Morgan inserted the thumb drive into her laptop. Password-encrypted files filled the screen. She entered a sequence, her father's birthday, reversed, followed by her mother's initials. The files opened. Photographs, documents, mission reports, evidence that Operation Echo Valley had been compromised from within, evidence that pointed to deliberate sabotage, evidence that led directly to Captain Frank Carter, who had provided faulty intelligence to the CIA team. And at the end, a grainy satellite image, a compound in northern Pakistan, a prisoner being transferred between buildings. The image quality was poor, but the man's posture, the set of his shoulders, Olivia would recognize her father anywhere. The timestamp on the image. 3 months ago. Morning found her at the base firing range, alone in the pre-dawn light. She had retrieved her father's old M24 sniper rifle from its hiding place beneath her bunk. The weapon wasn't registered to her anymore, but that didn't matter. She field-stripped it with practiced precision, cleaned every component, reassembled it in under 4 minutes. Muscle memory didn't forget. A shadow fell across her. Colonel Reynolds stood at the edge of the range. Still in practice, I see. Morgan lowered the rifle. Why show me this now? Reynolds approached, hands in the pockets of his worn combat pants. Because the CIA is launching a new program, Project Shadow Protocol, a next-generation sniper initiative combining traditional skills with cutting-edge technology. He paused. Carter is being positioned to lead it. What does that have to do with my father? Everything. Reynolds looked out across the range. Carter was stationed at Echo Valley Base when your team was ambushed. He provided the intel that sent you into that trap, and I believe he knew exactly what he was doing. Morgan's grip tightened on the rifle. Why would he sabotage a CIA operation? Politics. Ambition. Reynolds shrugged. Your father represented the old school. Human skill, judgment, intuition. Carter represents the future, technology, algorithms, drones. The two approaches have been fighting for funding and influence for years. You're saying he deliberately got my team killed to advance his career? I'm saying he made sure your father, the greatest proponent of traditional sniper methodology, disappeared during that operation. And now he's positioned to reshape American sniper doctrine in his image. Morning formation found Major Mitchell addressing the assembled personnel. Due to yesterday's demonstration, Langley has accelerated the Shadow Protocol initiative. Captain Carter will be overseeing the integration of the XM-2080 targeting system into our sniper program, effective immediately. Carter stood at attention beside Mitchell, triumph barely concealed beneath his professional demeanor. Additionally, Mitchell continued, Colonel William Reynolds will be implementing a parallel program evaluating traditional marksmanship techniques. These two approaches will be tested head-to-head next month to determine the future direction of our long-range targeting capabilities. Carter's jaw tightened visibly. Later that day, Carter cornered Morgan in the ammunition depot. I know who you are, he said, voice low. Daughter of the Ghost, the man who failed his team in '98 and again in 2016. Morgan continued inventorying rifle rounds, her face impassive. That shot yesterday was impressive, Carter continued. But it doesn't matter. The future belongs to systems, not people. Machines don't get tired. Don't get scared. Don't make mistakes. Like the mistake of sending false intelligence to Echo Valley? Morgan looked up, meeting his gaze. Carter's expression hardened. Be careful, Lieutenant. Accusing a superior officer without evidence is a serious offense. I have the evidence. Do you? Carter smiled coldly. Then why haven't you used it? Because you know no one would believe you over me. He leaned closer. Your father understood how the game is played. That's why he's rotting in a cell instead of leading this program. You just admitted he's alive. Carter straightened. I admitted nothing, and even if I did, no one would believe you. He turned to leave, then paused. Stay in your lane, Lieutenant. Stick to counting bullets. It's safer. That evening, Colonel Reynolds found Morgan sitting alone on a bench outside the barracks, staring at the stars. He all but confessed, she said without preamble. Reynolds nodded. But we still can't prove it. So, what's our play? Reynolds sat beside her. I'm establishing a competing program, Legacy Protocol, based on human skill augmented by technology, not replaced by it. I want you to lead the training. Morgan turned to him. I haven't been an active shooter in years. Yesterday suggests otherwise. Reynolds looked at her steadily. Your shot proved what I've been arguing for years, that no technology can replace the intuition and adaptability of a skilled human sniper. Carter's approach makes us vulnerable to countermeasures, technical failures, environmental conditions. Why me? There are other qualified snipers. Because you're Gregory Morgan's daughter. Because you've been trained in methodologies the regular military has never seen. And because you have the most compelling reason to see this through. He paused. Help me establish this program, and I'll help you find your father. Morgan stared out at the darkness. I left that life for a reason, Colonel. Because of Echo Valley. Because you couldn't save your team. Reynolds' voice softened. I understand guilt, Lieutenant. I've carried my share. But sometimes, the best way to honor those we've lost is to continue what they believed in. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant. Morgan thought about her father, his patience as he taught her to calculate wind, to read terrain, to understand the physics that governed a bullet's flight. She thought about the colleagues she'd lost in Echo Valley. And she thought about Carter, who would reshape America's special operations in his image if left unchallenged. When do we start? She asked. Reynolds smiled slightly. We already have. The Wall of Heroes stood at Fort Bragg's eastern edge, polished black granite reflecting the rising sun, covered in the names of soldiers who never came home. Lieutenant Olivia Morgan stood before it alone, her breath forming small clouds in the early morning air. Her fingers traced names she knew by heart. Sergeant Michael Torres, Specialist Amy Chen, Corporal David Park, Lieutenant James Walsh, her Echo Valley team, the ones who hadn't made it back. 3 years ago, they had walked into an ambush meant for twice their numbers. Morgan had been on overwatch a mile away, watching through her scope as her friends fought for their lives. She had eliminated 12 hostiles that day, fired until her barrel glowed red, until her trigger finger bled, until the rescue choppers arrived. But she couldn't save everyone. 4 names on this wall belonged to her team. And her father, though not officially listed, had disappeared in the chaos. Presumed dead until Reynolds' intelligence suggested otherwise. Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel. Colonel Reynolds stood beside her, looking at the names. Why did you really come back to this life? He asked quietly. You could have stayed in logistics. Safe. Quiet. Morgan's jaw tightened. Because these 4 didn't get a choice. She gestured to the wall. They'd want me to keep going, to make sure fewer names end up here. Reynolds nodded. That's why I asked you to lead the legacy program. The ceremony was scheduled for 0900 hours. Major Mitchell would formally announce the competitive evaluation between Carter's technology-centric Shadow Protocol and Reynolds' skill-based Legacy Protocol. The outcome would determine the future of America's long-range targeting capabilities. As they walked back toward the base, Reynolds handed Morgan a sealed envelope. New intelligence. That compound in Pakistan where we spotted your father? It was emptied last week. Prisoners transferred to an unknown location. Morgan's heart sank. So, we've lost him again. Maybe not. Reynolds' weathered face showed the first hint of a smile. One of my old contacts intercepted communications suggesting he's being brought to U.S. soil, a black site in Nevada for enhanced interrogation. Why move him now after all this time? Because of you. Reynolds looked at her directly. Your shot at the demonstration made waves. Someone high up connected the dots, realized the ghost's daughter is active again. They want to use your father as leverage. Against me? Against both of us, to ensure the legacy protocol fails. The parade ground filled with personnel in dress uniforms. The ceremony was modest by military standards. No media, no civilians, just the soldiers who understood what was at stake. Major Mitchell stood at a podium with the CIA observers flanking him. Carter stood to his right, resplendent in his decorated uniform. Reynolds and Morgan approached from the barracks, their faces composed but tension evident in their posture. Before we begin, Mitchell announced, Captain Carter has requested a final evaluation, a head-to-head competition to demonstrate the superiority of the XM-2080 targeting system over traditional methodologies. Carter stepped forward. With all due respect to Colonel Reynolds and Lieutenant Morgan, we need objective proof that their approach is viable in modern combat scenarios. His voice carried confidence bordering on arrogance. I propose a 3-target engagement at varying distances under simulated combat conditions. Reynolds leaned close to Morgan. He's desperate. He knows we're onto him about Echo Valley. Mitchell looked between the two groups. Colonel Reynolds, do you accept this challenge? Reynolds deferred to Morgan with a slight nod. We accept, she said calmly. With one condition. When we win, Captain Carter will remove himself from the Shadow Protocol program. Carter's smile tightened. And when I win, the Legacy Protocol is terminated, permanently. Agreed, Mitchell declared. The competition will commence at 1300 hours. As the crowd dispersed, an older CIA observer approached Morgan. A man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Lieutenant Morgan, he said quietly. Jack Harmon. I worked with your father in Berlin. Morgan studied him cautiously. I need you to know, Harmon continued, voice barely above a whisper. Your father is alive, being transported to Nevada today. He pressed a small object into her palm, a challenge coin with a ghost engraved on one side. He gave me this before Echo Valley. Said if anything happened to him, I should find his daughter. Before Morgan could respond, Harmon melted back into the crowd. She looked down at the coin, her father's personal token, one she had seen countless times during her childhood. At 1300 hours, the competition range was prepared. 3 targets at varying distances, 800 meters, 1,500 meters, and 2,200 meters. Wind machines created variable conditions. Smoke generators reduced visibility. Recorded gunfire played over loudspeakers to simulate battlefield stress. Carter arrived with his team and the XM-2080 equipped rifle. Morgan came alone with her father's old M24, modified with modern components but fundamentally unchanged from the weapon that had served snipers since the Vietnam era. Ladies first, Carter offered with false courtesy. Morgan took position behind her rifle. The first target, 800 meters, was almost insulting in its simplicity. She eliminated it with a single shot. The second target, 1,500 meters, required more calculation. Wind speed was variable, gusting unpredictably from the machines. She took a breath, assessed the conditions, fired. Another hit, center mass. The third target, 2,200 meters, presented the real challenge. Smoke obscured the line of sight. The recorded gunfire had increased in volume, designed to break concentration. Morgan tuned it out, focused on the environment. The wind had shifted again, now coming from multiple directions, creating a swirling effect. She made her calculations, factoring in variables that went beyond the standard formulas. She fired. The bullet traveled for 2.7 seconds, riding air currents, fighting gravity. Impact. Another perfect shot. Carter took his position, confident despite Morgan's performance. The XM-2080 system would compensate for all variables. Technology would prevail over human skill. His first shot, perfect. 800 meters was nothing for the advanced system. His second shot, another hit, though slightly off-center. The variable winds had confused the algorithm slightly, but the system adapted. Then the third target. As Carter prepared to fire, Reynolds activated a small device in his pocket. Immediately, the XM-2080's display flickered. Electronic countermeasures. Exactly the vulnerability he had warned about. Carter fired anyway, trusting the technology. The shot missed completely. System failure, Reynolds announced loudly. In a real combat situation, Captain Carter would have just exposed his position without eliminating the target. Carter's face flushed with anger. You sabotaged the equipment. I employed standard electronic countermeasures, Reynolds corrected. The same type our adversaries use. Your system failed exactly as predicted. Major Mitchell stepped forward, his expression grim. The demonstration is clear. Lieutenant Morgan's approach has proven more resilient under adverse conditions. Carter's composure broke. This is absurd. She's nothing but a logistics officer. Her father was a relic, and she's following in his footsteps, straight to obsolescence. The crowd fell silent at his outburst. My father, Morgan said quietly, her voice carrying in the stillness, understood that no technology can replace human judgment. That's why you sabotaged his mission at Echo Valley, because he threatened your vision of warfare without warriors. Carter's eyes narrowed. You can't prove any of that. Actually, she can. The new voice came from behind the assembled soldiers. Everyone turned. A man stood there, thin, weathered, with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had endured years of hardship. His eyes, however, were unmistakable. The same calculating intensity that Morgan possessed. The eyes of a predator, of a man who had made impossible shots under impossible conditions. Gregory Morgan. The ghost. Alive. Dad? Morgan's composure broke for the first time. The elder Morgan stepped forward, flanked by two CIA officers, including Harmon. My extraction from Pakistan was completed this morning. Just in time, it seems. Carter's face drained of color. This is impossible. You were captured. By militants who sold me to Pakistani intelligence, Gregory Morgan confirmed. Who kept me alive hoping I would train their snipers. He looked directly at Carter. They had very detailed information about my mission. Information only someone at Echo Valley Base would have known. Reynolds stepped forward. We have the full communication records, Carter. Your transmissions to Pakistani intelligence, the payments to your offshore account, all of it. Carter looked around wildly, seeing his career, his freedom, evaporating before his eyes. In desperation, he lunged for his rifle. In one fluid motion, Olivia Morgan drew her sidearm and centered it on Carter's chest. Don't. Carter froze, then slowly raised his hands. Military police officers moved in, securing him without incident. As they led Carter away, Gregory Morgan approached his daughter. 3 years of separation hung between them. 3 years of believing the other might be dead. You made that 4,000-meter shot, he said simply. I heard about it even in captivity. The guards were talking about an American woman who made an impossible shot. I had a good teacher, Olivia replied, holstering her weapon. Gregory smiled slightly. You've surpassed the teacher. 1 week later, Fort Bragg's command center buzzed with activity. The legacy protocol had been fully authorized, with Gregory Morgan and Colonel Reynolds overseeing the theoretical framework while Lieutenant Olivia Morgan handled the practical training. In the shooting range, 5 recruits stood at attention, selected for their potential rather than their existing records. Young faces, eager eyes, unaware of what real precision demanded. Olivia Morgan stood before them, her father's challenge coin in her pocket. I'm not here to teach you to kill, she began. I'm here to teach you to be surgical, clean, efficient, respectful of the weight that comes with pulling a trigger. She pointed to a rifle case on the table beside her. Inside that case is an M24 sniper rifle. Technology from the 1980s. By the time we're done, you'll be able to outshoot any computerized system ever created. Not because the rifle is special, but because you will be. She looked each recruit in the eye. Precision is a form of compassion. Every bullet you don't waste is a life you might save, yours or someone else's. Behind the recruits, Gregory Morgan and Colonel Reynolds watched with approval. Two generations of snipers, united by a shared philosophy. By the understanding that in an age of increasing technological dependency, the human element remained irreplaceable. "They'll be ready," Gregory said, quietly. Reynolds nodded. "They have to be." Carter wasn't working alone. There are others who believe as he did, that machines should replace human judgment. "They forget that machines can be hacked, jammed, corrupted," Gregory observed. "But skill—" He looked at his daughter, standing tall before her students. "Skill endures." As the sun set over Fort Bragg, Olivia Morgan stood at the firing line, demonstrating proper form to her students. Her father worked beside her, two legends united at last. Behind them, the American flag snapped in the breeze, red and white and blue against an endless sky. In a world increasingly dominated by technology, they stood as reminders that some things couldn't be replicated by algorithms. Patience, judgment, the human capacity to adapt to changing conditions, the intuition that came from thousands of hours of practice. The art of precision would continue, passed from one generation to the next, not as a means of destruction, but as a discipline that saved lives through its very exactitude. The ghost's legacy would endure, not in shadow, but in the light of knowledge shared. And in the hands of his daughter, the woman who had made the impossible shot when all others had failed.